Emma had never imagined herself standing here, on the cracked, leaf-strewn porch of a house she barely knew, a house she had just inherited from an aunt whose presence in her life had been little more than a whisper in family stories. Hollow's End wasn't the place she had ever pictured calling home. The small town, tucked away between dense forests and mist-shrouded hills, looked like a forgotten postcard from another century. The sky was a dull, bruised gray, heavy with the promise of rain. A sharp wind sliced through the skeletal branches of ancient oaks, scattering dry leaves like brittle paper across the cracked pavement. Emma's breath came out in light clouds, her thin jacket doing little to hold back the creeping cold that had seeped into her bones on the long journey here. She hesitated before the door, a dark slab of wood weathered by decades of storms and neglect. Its surface was cracked and splintered, with rusted iron fittings that seemed to resist her every attempt to grip the cold doorknob. When it finally turned with a reluctant groan, the sound echoed hollowly, swallowed by the thick silence that clung to the house like a shroud. Inside, the air was stale and heavy, like the house itself had been holding its breath for years. Dust motes floated in shafts of dim light filtering through grimy windows, settling on furniture covered in white sheets, the outlines of chairs and tables ghostly and indistinct. The faint scent of old wood, mildew, and something else, something metallic, like dried blood, hung in the air. Emma's footsteps stirred the silence, her boots thudding softly on the creaking floorboards. Every sound felt amplified in the emptiness. Somewhere, the slow, methodical ticking of an old grandfather clock echoed from deep within the house, marking time with a deliberate, unyielding rhythm. She set her bags down, the suddenness of the motion disturbing a small cloud of dust that floated lazily in the pale light. Her fingers brushed against a cracked picture frame on a dusty shelf. Inside, a faded photograph of a young woman with sharp eyes and a knowing smile. Emma's gaze lingered, a strange mix of recognition and unease tightening in her chest. A cold draft whispered past her, carrying with it a faint, distant sound, almost like a voice, or the rustling of fabric. She spun around, flashlight raised, but the rooms behind her were empty, dark and waiting. The silence pressed down, thick and suffocating. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the spell. A message from Mark, her oldest friend and constant voice of reason. "You sure you want to do this alone? That place gives me the creeps." She smiled despite herself, fingers trembling as she typed back, "It's just a house. I'll be fine." But as she turned back toward the shadowed hallway, the feeling lingered that she had stepped not into a house, but into something watching, something waiting. The house exhaled around her, a long, slow breath that stirred the dust and shadows, and somewhere deep in the walls, a whisper passed, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Welcome home." Emma's heart still pounded in her chest as she stepped deeper into the house. The narrow hallway stretched before her like a dark tunnel, its walls lined with faded wallpaper peeling at the edges, curling like dead leaves clinging to a dying tree. The floor beneath was warped and uneven, each footstep threatening to break through years of neglect. The house was alive in its silence. Emma could feel it in the way the shadows shifted just beyond the beam of her flashlight, how the air seemed heavier here, as if saturated with 1,000 unspoken secrets. Somewhere far away, the grandfather clock struck the hour, a slow, mournful toll that resonated like a death knell. Her eyes caught on a small table against the wall, cluttered with relics of the past, a rusted key, a cracked porcelain figurine, and a stack of yellowed letters tied together with a brittle ribbon. Emma hesitated before picking up the top letter, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the fragile paper. The handwriting was her aunt's, elegant yet hurried, the ink faded but still legible. "If you have found this, then you have come too far. The house remembers, and the walls speak. Trust nothing you see, hear, or feel here. Leave before it's too late." A cold shiver ran down Emma's spine, but curiosity gnawed at her resolve. She tucked the letter into her jacket pocket and pressed on. Up ahead, a door stood slightly ajar, its hinges groaning like a wounded animal as she pushed it open. The room beyond was a study, lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves sagging under the weight of dusty tomes and cracked leather-bound volumes. A faded Persian rug covered most of the floor, worn thin in places like skin stretched taut over bone. Emma stepped inside, the faint sound of scratching catching her attention. She froze, straining to listen. It was coming from the far corner, near an old wooden desk cluttered with papers and a half-burnt candle. As she moved closer, the scratching grew louder, slow, deliberate, almost like claws raking across wood. Her breath hitched. Suddenly, a book slid off the shelf with a sharp thud, landing open on the floor. Emma's flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw something, a shadow, dart across the room. She blinked, but there was nothing there. The air grew colder, her skin prickling as if touched by unseen fingers. The silence returned, heavier than before, pressing against her ears and rattling the fragile edges of her sanity. A voice whispered from the darkness, soft, hissing, barely audible, "Leave, before it's too late." Emma's pulse quickened. She wanted to run, to escape the house's suffocating grip, but something kept her rooted to the spot, a mixture of fear and a stubborn need to understand. The house was alive, yes, but not just with memories. Something else lingered here, something old and hungry. As the shadows deepened and the night closed in, Emma realized she had crossed a line, a boundary from which there was no turning back. The hours slipped by unnoticed as Emma roamed the shadowed rooms of the house, each step sinking her deeper into a labyrinth of unease. The walls no longer felt like mere walls. They breathed. They watched. They whispered secrets she wasn't meant to hear. The fading light outside gave way to a thick, impenetrable darkness that swallowed the house whole. Emma's flashlight flickered intermittently, the weak beam barely cutting through the blackness. The silence had stretched too long, pregnant with menace. Then came the whispers, not just faint murmurs now, but voices rising, urgent and fractured. They curled around her ears like smoke, half-formed words in a language forgotten by time. "Leave, you don't belong. The pact is broken." Emma clutched the letter from her aunt, the paper crumpling beneath her trembling fingers. What pact? What had she stumbled into? Her breath hitched when a sudden crash echoed from upstairs, a door slamming, or something far worse. Heart racing, she ascended the narrow staircase, each creaking step a testament to the house's unwillingness to let her go. At the top, the corridor stretched endlessly, lined with closed doors. The air was colder here, each breath turning to mist before her eyes. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. She stopped before a door at the end, its surface marred with deep scratches, as if something had clawed to get out. The handle was icy to the touch. Emma's hand hesitated, hovering over the knob, before she forced herself to turn it. The room beyond was a child's bedroom, frozen in time. A faded crib stood against the far wall, draped in cobwebs. Old toys lay scattered on the floor, coated in dust but arranged as if waiting for a child's return. Emma's eyes were drawn to a small diary resting on a rickety desk. She opened it to the first page. The handwriting was childish but urgent. "They come at night. The shadows with teeth. They want the pact to be kept. They want the silence." A chill gripped her spine. The entry spoke of fear, growing, suffocating, of voices from the walls, of things watching from the darkness. The last page was smeared with what looked like dried tears or something darker. Behind her, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Emma spun around, heart pounding wildly. The whispers had stopped. The silence was suffocating, deeper than before, pressing in from all sides. She was trapped. And the house was waiting for her to break the pact. The door stood locked behind Emma, sealing her inside the cold, stale air of the child's room. She rattled the handle in desperate attempts to open it, but the door refused to budge, as if the house itself had melded wood and silence into an unbreakable barrier. Her breath came in ragged gasps, fogging the cracked window panes that framed the room in pale moonlight. The toys scattered on the floor suddenly seemed less innocent. A cracked porcelain doll stared at her with hollow eyes, and the faded stuffed bear's fur was matted and stained. The whispers returned, no longer faint but a chorus of urgent voices swelling in her mind. The pact, keep it, or be claimed. Emma's fingers trembled as she clutched the diary close. The child's words echoed in her mind like a warning: shadows with teeth, silence, a pact. The room's corners seemed to darken, the shadows pooling like liquid, creeping closer with a slow, deliberate movement. Emma's skin prickled as if icy fingers traced her spine. A sudden, chilling breeze swept through the room, impossible, as the windows were closed. The candle on the desk flickered, then snapped out, plunging her into complete darkness. Emma's heart thundered as a shape emerged from the blackness, a figure, indistinct yet undeniably present. It moved silently, a dark silhouette that seemed to absorb the light around it. "Who's there?" Emma's voice trembled, barely a whisper. The figure didn't answer, but the whispers grew louder, overwhelming. "The pact, broken, must pay." Panic surged through her veins. She dropped the diary, and it fell open on the floor, pages fluttering as if caught in an invisible wind. Emma spun toward the door, desperate to escape, but the walls themselves seemed to pulse, closing in. Suddenly, something cold and wet brushed against her cheek. She gasped, turning quickly, but there was nothing. The house was alive, and it was hungry. Emma pressed her back against the locked door, tears streaming as the shadows closed the circle around her. The whispers morphed into a guttural chant, ancient and terrible. Her mind raced. What pact? What had her aunt been hiding? And could Emma survive long enough to find out? Trapped in the suffocating darkness of the room, Emma fought to steady her breathing. The cold shadows flickered at the edges of her vision, a creeping nightmare that refused to relent. Her fingers brushed the floor, searching blindly for the fallen diary. When she grasped it again, the soft crackle of the brittle pages was a fragile tether to reality. Her trembling hands scanned the worn, childish script once more, desperate for answers. The diary spoke of a pact made long ago, an agreement bound in blood and silence. A promise to keep the house, and the darkness within, at bay, sealed by the family for generations. Breaking it, the diary warned, would invite something ancient and merciless. Emma's thoughts raced back to the letter from her aunt, the warning she had ignored: the house remembers, and the walls speak. The walls indeed spoke, through shadows, whispers, and the unrelenting weight pressing down on her. A sudden breeze stirred the pages, revealing a hidden sketch beneath the writing, a crude, twisting symbol, half circle, half serpent, surrounded by strange markings that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. She traced the shape with her finger, feeling a chill that wasn't just from the cold air. The symbol felt alive, like a seal keeping something terrible imprisoned. Suddenly, the door creaked. Slowly, it swung open, spilling pale moonlight into the room. Emma's heart leapt. She stumbled to her feet, blinking against the sudden brightness. Standing in the doorway was a figure, older woman, pale and worn, eyes sharp but shadowed with grief. "You shouldn't be here," the woman said, voice trembling yet firm. "Not without knowing what you've disturbed." Emma swallowed her fear, trying to steady her voice. Who are you?" "My name is Lillian," the woman replied. "I was your aunt's closest friend, the only one who knew the truth. That house is cursed. Bound by a pact made centuries ago to contain the darkness inside. Your aunt kept it sealed, but now that you're here, the balance is breaking." Emma felt the weight of Lillian's words like a stone pressing on her chest. "What kind of darkness?" Lillian's eyes darted nervously toward the shadows creeping at the edges of the room. The kind that feeds on fear, on broken promises, on silence. And it's hungry again. The whispers rose in the room like a tide, voices chanting around them, angry, desperate, hungry. Emma's hands clenched the diary tightly. How do I stop it? Lillian's gaze hardened. You don't. Not yet. First, you must understand what binds this place, and what price it demands. Outside, the wind howled like a beast unleashed, rattling the windows as the house seemed to sigh, alive and watching, waiting for the next move in a game older than time itself. The house groaned around Emma, its breath shallow and ragged as if sensing the final act was upon it. The shadows no longer lurked at the edges, they poured in like a living tide, swirling and twisting, hungry and eager. The whispers had risen to a fever pitch, a cacophony of voices, demanding, pleading, condemning. Lillian stood beside her, pale but resolute. There is no escape without paying the price, she said, voice breaking like dry leaves. The Pact demands a sacrifice, blood, silence, and obedience. Emma's heart hammered in her chest, every instinct screaming to run, to scream, to fight. But the house had other plans. The walls seemed to close in, the darkness solidifying into shapes, twisted figures with hollow eyes and grinning mouths, their claws scraping against the peeling wallpaper. One reached for Emma, icy fingers brushing her skin, freezing her blood in place. Remember, Lillian whispered, the pact was made to keep the darkness sealed. But every generation, it must be renewed. Or the house consumes. Emma's mind raced. The diary's symbol glowed faintly in her hand, the serpent swallowing its own tail, eternal and unyielding. The pact was a curse, a loop of pain and terror. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the last candle. In the pitch black, Emma heard a new sound, slow, deliberate breathing behind her. She turned, heart in her throat. A figure stepped forward from the shadows, her aunt. But not the woman she remembered. Her eyes were black voids, her smile a grotesque twist. You came too late, the voice was hollow, distant, like an echo from beyond the grave. Emma stumbled back as the apparition advanced, dragging a chain of shadows that writhed and whispered. The pact demands you join. Or be devoured. Panic surged. Emma screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the darkness. She felt the cold embrace of shadow hands closing around her, squeezing, pulling, tearing. The last thing she saw before the world went black was the symbol glowing on the wall, a circle closing, eternal and merciless. The morning sun found the house silent and empty. No trace of Emma remained, only the diary, open on the floor, its pages fluttering in a breeze that wasn't there. The house waited, patient and hungry, for the next to break the silence.